Welcome to Wandering Jews at J Squared Adventures. Travel far enough and you meet yourself.
We're your hosts. I'm Scott.
I'm Sorrel. Today, we're traveling to Vienna, a city of dazzling brilliance and haunting contradictions. Vienna was once a glittering capital of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, a cradle of philosophy, music, and revolution. Walking its grand boulevards, you can almost hear the hum of conversation from smoky cafes, the echoes of waltzes, the pulse of modern ideas taking shape. But for Jews, Vienna was a city of deep paradox. On the one hand, a place where they were both celebrated and scapegoated, insiders and outsiders, creators and victims. How could one city hold both such light and such darkness?
Yeah, so well put. And in so many ways, Vienna is an amazing paradigm for the Jewish European story in the 19th century and leading up to the Holocaust. When we think about the Vienna Jewish community, it really did stand at the center of European creativity. They were insiders in the city's universities and salons, but they were very much outsiders in politics and in society in many ways. Celebrated for their genius, many of them, yet condemned for their Jewish origins. And their lives highlighted these tensions of Jewish identity in a city that was full of opportunity, was exclusive, it was about innovation, but it was also about deep suspicion.
So when we're talking, Scott, about this tension, right? So we look at Vienna's creative energy. In part, that was fueled by opportunity for the Jews, because after the Austro-Hungarian Compromise of 1867, Jews suddenly gained access to what previously was barred to them, civil rights, opening doors to professions like law, journalism, medicine, finance, the arts. So we're looking by the beginning of the early 20th century, Jews made up a staggering 10% of Vienna's population and a significant portion of its intellectual and professional elite. And you were talking about how they were, on the one hand, celebrated for their genius. Perhaps their genius was also antagonistic. Perhaps that also was part of the hatred.
Definitely. And I think this idea of kind of antagonism that you suggest, this idea of being outsiders, in many ways, again, we see that as a negative, being an outsider, being a stranger, being a foreigner, but it gave them a positive edge. One historian, Peter Gay, he calls it an unprecedented torrent of creative energy. And he really sees it as being a product of them being outsiders, yet being insiders. And exclusion did force Jewish thinkers to really maybe question the world, who they were, where they stood, to develop independent perspectives and to innovate in fields. And again, we know from psychology and psychoanalysis to literature and to music.
Yeah, and it also speaks to something deeper, I think, embedded within Jewish culture, because Jewish culture places a high premium on learning and debate, right? We see throughout the ages the value of the written words and how text was accessible to Jews, right? They had ownership of it. And Jewish families, they place such a strong emphasis on education, both religious and secular. We look at the Talmudic tradition of debate and interpretation. It translated well into the modern disciplines that we were talking about, like law, philosophy, and literature. So Vienna's universities and their coffee houses, their salons, became incubators of ideas where Jewish students and scholars mingled with the avant-garde.
And Vienna was also a melting pot of cultures, not just Jewish, German, Slavic, Hungarian, and Jewish influences. They all were converging in this one city. Jewish creativity, it pulsed in almost every corner. Music with Gustav Mahler and Arnold Schoenberg. Literature, Stefan Zweig, Arnold Schnitzler. Politics, Victor Adler, Otto Bohr. And psychology, of course, with Sigmund Freud. A field that Viktor Frankl, of course, would later expand in his own way based on his experiences during the period of the Holocaust.
And when we're talking about the creativity, the creative energy, where could that be felt? Where was that expressed on a day-to-day basis? It could be felt flowing in the cafes of Vienna. Café Central, which opened in 1876, and Café Spill from 1880, they weren't just coffee shops. They were hubs, buzzing hubs, where the city's greatest thinkers, writers, and dreamers gathered. Freud, Herzl, Zweig, even Trotsky passed through those doors. Artists and writers lingered over endless cups of coffee that were flowing as frequently as the ideas talking late into the night.
And in these smoke-filled rooms, remember, people smoked in coffee shops, they used to. Ideas were stirred as vigorously as the coffee. And so psychoanalysis, Zionism, satire, various forms of socialism, they were all brewed and stirred around these marble tables, beautiful sparkling chandeliers, gigantic glass windows looking out onto the streets. The Viennese Cafe was more than a meeting place. It was really a local institution. It was a crucible for the creation of modernity.
We were talking about all this positivity and creativity. And at the beginning of our discussion, Scott, we were talking about the tension. So Vienna, so radiant with Jewish genius, we know, was not just the birthplace of creativity and productive ideas, but also of modern antisemitism. A city that nurtured Freud and Herzl, yet it also nurtured Karl Lueger and later Adolf Hitler. The irony couldn't be more stark. The same city that gave the world psychoanalysis and Zionism also sowed the seeds of racial hatred and genocide. Karl Lueger, elected mayor in 1897, famously declared, "I decide who is a Jew." His Christian Social Party weaponized resentment, fusing religious prejudice with racial pseudoscience and economic anxiety, took advantage of that tension in society and projected that on Jews. His rhetoric would later, of course, be the inspiration for Adolf Hitler.
In 1926, the city of Vienna erected a statue in honor of Karl Lueger, this legendary political figure and long-standing mayor of the city. And it still stands there in a square named after Dr. Karl Lueger. In 2023, as part of a public debate about Lueger and about Vienna's anti-Semitic heritage, the city announced that the statue would be tilted, get this, 3.5 degrees to the right. I just want to say that one more time. The statue would be tilted 3.5 degrees to the right, a symbolic, well-meaning gesture meant to evoke a kind of sinking ship, repudiating in many ways the noxious political ideas that Lueger championed. Critics, of course, said 3.5 degrees insufficient. And voices of criticism made the argument political anti-Semitism was invented by Karl Lueger. It was nurtured here in Vienna. Tilting the statue is, at best, a half-hearted approach to dealing with one of the most burning historic issues, and I dare say present issues, of Europe.
One can certainly understand why it may appear to be too little, too late. So let's take a look at some of these greatest minds of modern Europe that we alluded to. Freud, the father of psychoanalysis. He was born in the mid-19th century. He explored the human mind while carrying his Jewish identity. It's interesting to see how each of these great thinkers related to their Jewishness. So he carried his Jewish identity as an outsider from that perspective, the outsider's, advantage. He wrote, "My Jewishness is something I cannot deny. It is a source of my outsider's perspective and perhaps of my intellectual courage." So that speaks to what you were talking about, Scott, like that outsider advantage. He was very cognizant of that fact. And in his book, Moses and Monotheism, Freud wrote a psychological portrayal, interestingly, of Moses and of the sources of Hebrew monotheism in ancient Egypt.
Theodor Herzl, we've talked about him before, the father of political Zionism. The young journalist Herzl was transformed by the rise of modern political anti-Semitism in Europe's most advanced countries, among them in Austria and in France, and by the Albert Dreyfus affair, a legal attack and an unjust imprisonment against a French officer of Jewish background by the French military and by French conservative forces. In his revolutionary pamphlet, which in many ways was the result of his experiences, The State of the Jews, Herzl presented a plan to revitalize the Jewish people through the establishment of a Jewish national movement and aimed to establish a corner of the globe where the Jews as a nation could fulfill their right to self-determination. He wrote, "We are a people, one people. Our enemies have made us one. Let us then become one willingly.
Moving on to music, Gustav Mahler, composer and conductor. He actually did convert to Catholicism to direct the Vienna court opera, but he definitely remains culturally Jewish. His music revolutionized the symphony, blending emotional intensity with philosophical depth. His two most famous works, Symphony No. 2, Resurrection, and Symphony No. 5, explore themes of morality, transcendence, and the human condition, marking him as a bridge between Romanticism and modernism. His epitaph reads, "He who seeks me knows who I was."
Stefan Zweig, writer, humanist, European idealist. Zweig was born into a wealthy Jewish family. He became one of the most widely read authors of his age. His fiction, Letter from an Unknown Woman, Beware of Pity, The Royal Game, was marked by psychological insight and by emotional depth. Biographies, Marie Antoinette, for example, blended history with literary flair. In Exile, he wrote The World of Yesterday, really a lyrical elegy for the lost world of Vienna. He writes, "I was born into a world of order, of security, of stability, and I have lived to see it collapse." Zweig fled Vienna in 1934. He settled in Brazil, where he and his wife died by suicide in 1942. His death was mourned across continents. He embodied the European dream of unity, of culture as a civilizing force. Yet he was destroyed, and his family alongside him, by the forces that tore that dream apart.
What do we know about his connection to his Jewish identity?
So Zweig, in his writing, he does refer to his Jewish identity, but there's only a single work of his that is outrightly a Jewish topic, and it's actually a novel about the Roman destruction of Jerusalem and the chronicles of the lost menorah of the temple.
Fascinating. Wow. So let's look at the historical context and backgrounds which all this was taking place. As Europe stumbled into the disaster of World War I and the connected refugee crisis, we're looking at thousands of Eastern European Jews arriving in Vienna, escaping to Vienna, creating tensions between their acculturated and traditional communities.
At the same time, there were these growing voices for revolution. Revolution and Marxist ideas, socialist ideas were popular in intellectual circles, and some people talked about Red Vienna. And of course, many Jews, not only in Vienna and in Austria, but many young Jews throughout the Austro-Hungarian Empire, throughout the Tsarist Empire, and then obviously afterwards, when the Soviet Union was established, there were many young Jews who were really at the forefront of political activism and engagement with a pinkish red tinge.
And then we have Nathan Birnbaum, who famously coined the term Zionism. He was a Viennese intellectual, and he was one of the earliest voices to articulate Zionism, coining that term in the 1890s prior to Herzl's The State of the Jews. He was deeply engaged in Vienna's Jewish cultural and political life, later turned towards orthodoxy, reflecting the city's tension between secular modernity and religious tradition. So his journey from Zionist pioneer to spiritual seeker mirrored the complex identity struggle of Vienna's Jews. His own spiritual and political journey as a Jew is echoed in his words, "The Jewish soul cannot be saved by politics alone. It must return to its source."
By 1938, Austria was annexed by Nazi Germany. Vienna's Jews faced humiliation, deportation, and murder. Freud fled to London. Zweig, we mentioned. Mahler's music was banned. Over 66,000 Austrian Jews were murdered. Historian Hans Safran calls Vienna a model of radicalization. Ilana Offenberger wrote, "Vienna's Jews maintained a false hope until the bitter end. Their community was destroyed, not just physically, but spiritually."
And when we talk about the destruction, even after their demise, their light could not be extinguished. So we look at Vienna's Jewish luminaries, who were cultural alchemists, outsiders who became insiders, only to once more be cast out again. Their rise and fall mirror the city's tragic duality. On the one hand, a beacon of enlightenment that devolved very quickly into darkness. Their lives reflect the fragility of belonging, the power of culture, and the tragedy of modern antisemitism. They weren't just victims, they were visionaries. Their legacy until today challenges us to ask,
what does it mean to be Jewish in a modern world? Can culture protect against hatred? How do we remember a world destroyed? As Stefan Zweig wrote, we were wrong, but we were not foolish to hope. And now, something for the road. A tip, a recommendation to help you make every journey your own.
My name is Jeremy Aaron, and I'm an expert tour educator for J Squared Adventures in both Israel and in Europe. I live in Herzliya with my wife, Rona, and my boys, Mikey and Lior. And today, I'm in Vienna. So here's my one for the road. For me, exploring, appreciating the wealth of stories of the Jewish people is an integral part of my identity and something that I want to pass on to my kids. Maya Angelou, she said, you can't really know where you're going until you know where you've been. And whilst the quote's accurate, for me, my countless Jewish journeys across Europe are inspired by centuries of stories about my people, stories about my wider family that I want to pass on to the next generation. So today, I want to introduce you to a few people, starting with my great uncle, Eric. My own ancestral roots are mainly in Belarus and Poland. However, Uncle Eric was born in Vienna before he moved to England and settled in Manchester, which is where I grew up. My parents chose my Hebrew name in his memory, and I wanted to know more about him and the world he left behind. So Uncle Eric's family lived at the 19th to the 20th century, that turnaround going into the 21st century. That was the history of Uncle Eric's family. But Uncle Eric himself, he grew up in this time of innovation, intellectualism, of enlightenment, of cultural development. It was a wonderful place to live in Vienna. And a century on, it is indeed still a cultural mecca. And Vienna is still one of the most attractive travel destinations in Europe. It's famed for its music, its art, its cuisine, and exquisite cakes. And of course, its bustling coffee houses overflowing with local gossipers, animated intellectual debaters, weary shoppers resting their aching feet. And it's a city that really has everything. But behind this beautiful facade is a very challenging story. And that's Uncle Eric's story. My second character that I'll introduce you to is composer Gustav Mahler. Now, Mahler called Vienna a city of enchantment and elegance. He lived in Vienna, but he always felt like an outsider, as he not only originated from Bohemia, but he was born to a Jewish family. But despite that, he converted to Catholicism in 1897 in order to take up a position as a director of the Vienna Court Opera. He continued, however, to be the target of antisemitism. He was attacked, and he was always known as being the Jew. He actually famously stated, "And 3 times without a country, a native of Bohemia in Austria, an Austrian amongst Germans, and a Jew throughout the world." So Mahler had a very difficult time, but despite this, he endured, leaving a legacy as an influential Austrian composer of large-scale symphonies and songs, and one of the greatest composers the world's ever seen. If you can get tickets, I highly recommend experiencing Mahler's Symphony No. 9, the acoustics of the Vienna Musikverein, the concert hall. Oh, and dress smart, sweatpants are definitely discouraged. Mahler's alienation was symptomatic of the Viennese Jewish reality. His story brings me back to the world that Uncle Eric grew up in. But it also reflects that of Hugo Bettauer, an Austrian writer, journalist, playwright of Jewish descent who, like Mahler, also converted to Christianity. Bettauer wrote Der Stadt ohne Juden, The City Without Jews, which was first published in 1922 and was made into a film a couple of years later. The book makes for a great read on the plane journey to Vienna. Although it is fiction, it presents a mirror of the 1920s Vienna, a society in crisis, blind to the catastrophe its prejudices foreshadow. And it is eerily prophetic, a cultural snapshot of a fractured Vienna post-war identity and the precariousness of the Jewish life in that interwar period. Perhaps that's the reason why Uncle Eric decided to leave Vienna. He grew in this culturally, intellectually rich in every sense, but it was coupled with challenges of prejudice and hostility. The Vienna Jewish Museum tells this and the wider story of Jewish life, loss, and renewal in the city. It was founded in 1895 as the world's first Jewish museum, celebrating Jewish culture, identity, amid a rising antisemitism. It was closed, looted by the Nazis in the 1930s, but after decades of post-war silence, the museum re-established in 1988 as Austria began confronting its Holocaust legacy. Today it preserves Jewish heritage, commemorates destruction, presents living Jewish culture. The current director of the Vienna Jewish Museum, Barbara Staudinger, was publicly recognized for museum leadership, especially in the context of sustainability, accepting the museum's award of the Australian Eco-Label. And incidentally, despite being an hour away from Vienna, in the city of Eisenstadt, Johann Reiss was recently honored for his long-standing work at the Austrian Jewish Museum. These are people who are telling the story of where their people have been and allowing the Viennese Jewish community to carve the path in which it's going. The Vienna Jewish Museum stands as both a memorial and a bridge, reconnecting Vienna with its Jewish past and present, passing on both Jewish personal and collective memories to the generations of the future. When you're there, be sure to meet members of the present Jewish community, hear their stories and the stories of their families. Uncle Eric would also contribute to that story, as well as Gustav Mahler and Hugo Batard. Vienna offers a plethora of wide boulevards adjoining magnificent museums, stunning palaces, majestic gardens, timeless music, celebrated art, yummy schnitzels, coffee, and scrumptious cakes. But a Jewish journey is also about the people you meet along the way, those who accompany you, and the stories we all have to share. Thanks for listening. I look forward to seeing you all in Europe on the road with J Squared Adventures. This was my one for the road.
Thanks for listening. Dive deeper into the world of travel on our J Squared Adventures website. That's j2adventures.com. And stay in the loop with our latest adventures on all our social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, all under J2 Adventures. And if you enjoyed hanging out with us, don't forget to leave us a comment, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, travel safely and keep wondering. I'm Sorrel.
I'm Scott.
See you soon with the Wandering Jews.